All right, YouTube, WikiLeaks has come through once again, pretty much disabling the myth that it's been compromised. With the Yemen files, what it shows, of course, is that the United States has been arming certain Yemeni groups to keep fighting going in that area. I guess Uncle Sam got kind of worried because the Houthi were trying to take over. The Shia there, aligned sort of with Iran and Russia, and so decided to go and spread more chaos in the region. If we just tried to get along with some of these nations and groups without playing grand chessboard in a proxy sense, we probably wouldn't have this problem. I think that Uncle Sam has stuck his dick into the world and stirred it around a little bit too much. Either way, whether we sort of pull back on the intervention in a foreign sense, or if we don't, there will be suffering down the road. Either policy proposal will eventually cause suffering. It's a difference between, do we batten down the hatches now and keep things more or less going as they are, and eventually we reap potentially a nuclear conflict, or do we reverse course, stop what we're doing? Some of these areas will be overrun by folks that don't really like us, but hopefully we can reconfigure the way we're doing things and then maybe avoid World War III or something like that. The answer to this problem is there is no easy solution. People who boil it down figuratively to either we need to nuke the bastards or give peace a chance overlook the larger situation, honestly, in the world. Unfortunately, there's no simplistic solution to such a problem. We have been involved with proxy wars and nation building and overthrows and civil wars and CIA drug and gun running for so long that we've collectively incensed dozens of nations, as well as plenty of groups that don't represent a nation but kind of want to. Even think of some of these militia groups taking over these countries. I would point out that this is the new major strategic point of the world. Syria is important because of pipelines. Iraq as well was important for the same reason. This particular region, what's on either side? The Chinese, as I've pointed out before, are building a massive base in Djibouti. This is a little tiny, almost micro-state with a little bit of oil and not much else. They welcome the Chinese coming there because it gives them some level of autonomy from the Western powers not far away from them, as well as giving them continued income. The Chinese will pay them through the nose for having a base there. The Chinese are trying to extend their control well beyond their own little sphere into this region so they can have nominal control over the oil. Right now, it's actually China, not Russia, that's primarily the main projective foe to the United States. The Russians are, of course, involved with Syria. You see a partnership between Russia and China, which is tenuous at best. It could fall apart at any time. BRICS is not the most stable thing ever constructed by man, let's face it. But you certainly see them partnering on Syria. I think they realize that the end game is in sight if Syria falls to Western forces. I personally think that it's an unacceptable risk to be involved in these regions. That includes Yemen, by the way. Keeping Yemen unstable is beneficial to the West because the other possibility, if the Houthi take over, of course, is that the Chinese might arrive. They might get directly involved, preventing any Saudi incursions. I know the Saudis want nuclear weapons as well. What would China then have? It would have potentially a military force on either side of this major choke point, which means that about 10% of the world's oil traveling through that region, yeah, it'd be under de facto Chinese control, especially since we dicked around in Egypt, who controls the Suez Canal, of course. And we created a problem there because Obama was short-sighted. Obama thought Muslim Brotherhood takes hold. He doesn't care if they tyrannize the population, they'd be more of a Western asset. He was hoping what Obama's strategy was to destabilize places like Libya, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and so forth, to expand what is essentially the vassal of the United States, which is Saudi control in the region, Sunni control, Islamofascism light, you could term it state Islamofascism, something along the lines of what the FSA wants. They're ideologically very similar to a group like the Muslim Brotherhood, similar groups in Libya. What instead happened is that Egypt resisted. Their military marched in and ousted them. and now they're more of a neutral player. Thanks, Obama. You know, one of the most strategically important nations on the face of the earth now no longer feels particularly positive towards us. Syria's not falling. Iraq's not falling, because the FSA, despite our arming and training them and funding them and conducting strikes against Assad's forces while pretending to strike ISIS, Assad has not fallen. The FSA was too small. Too many of its members defected to ISIS. Now we've got ISIS in Libya. We've created a much worse problem, essentially, in this region of the world. It's spread to Yemen. It's metastasizing. It's continuing to spread. Our involvement in Yemen can only cause problems, honestly. We shouldn't be involved there. It's unthinkably unethical that Obama, who is supposedly some great peacemonger, Nobel Prize-winning Obama himself, has killed probably at this point about as many people as W killed. The only difference is that because we're using drones and more secret strikes instead of simply marching in and laying waste to things with a great show of force that's being live streamed on CNN, fewer people understand that it's even going on. He's waging several wars currently in Syria, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, and you don't even hear about it. When's the last time that the U.S. media reported on these things? When's the last time that on MSNBC or CNN or even Fox they said something about Yemen and what's going on there? Been months. They talked about, oh yeah, Saudis conducted a strike here. Now back to your real news. That's because the U.S. media doesn't want to talk about it. They don't want it to be known that Obama's actually a complete fucking war hawk, who's, again, he's certainly creeping up towards killing a six-figure sum of people. It's probably well beyond that. You think we actually hear about every strike that occurs? No, you know about a small fraction of them, and even by that count, it's something like 50 or 60,000 civilians have been killed just by the drone program in the last few years. It's beginning to rival Bush-level amounts of killing. Now we find that we've metastasized the same problem to Yemen by arming and funding groups there, I guess to fight the Houthis or something, that half the weapons that they're using are U.S. manufactured. We found that in Syria. When some of these forces are moving through these areas, we find that the ISIS is using U.S. weapons, the FSA is using U.S. weapons, Assad's gotten a hold of U.S. weapons, stuff that's been captured. Those chemical weapons that were deployed could have been U.S. manufactured too. It would have been a perfect cause for striking Assad. A false flag, if you will. Stranger things have happened. Look at the Gulf of fucking Tonkin or something like that. It goes, all of this stuff, it's no longer even in the realm of conspiracy theories. Half the shit that's going on right now, 10 years ago, people said, oh, that would never happen. Now people act like it's common knowledge and there's nothing wrong with it. Oh yeah, you know, we're arming and funding these groups. You know, it's common knowledge. Oh, there's no problem with that. We hear about these retard politicians acting like the FSA is great or something. In reality, they're just national Islamo-fascists. The only difference between, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the only difference between the FSA and ISIS is that the FSA wants an independent fascist Syria. ISIS wants a fascist Syria as part of an overall conglomerate of nations, including Iraq and some of these others, that turns into a caliphate. It's the only difference. Ultimately, the FSA would be, if it were successful in its endeavors, it'd be so embattled by ISIS it would end up conjoined anyway. Their caliph would form. You'd have 3 or 4 nations forming one gigantic power, which would control a substantial sum of all the oil on the planet, that would resist Saudi incursions. And the Saudis aren't going to do anything about it. It wouldn't be aligned with maybe Russia and Iran at least, but at the same time, we'd end up having to fight them. Do we really have, at this point, the collective will as a society, or even necessarily the projective force to wage war in 4 or 5 different countries at the same time? Yeah, kind of, if we're deploying nuclear weapons, or we're willing to spend several $1 trillion on more conventional means, but then we have to occupy these places against foes that are well trained at going guerrilla style and disappearing with great rapidity and then fighting a partisan war. It wouldn't work. The fact that we're arming some of these groups in Yemen is a terrible idea. We shouldn't be involved at all. Let the Saudis get it. Let the Saudis do it. Let them take care of the issue. If we're so stuck on the idea of Yemen not falling to Shia control and potentially thus under this mini sphere of Iran, thus under Russia and China, if we're so concerned about that, get the Saudis involved. They've got all the money in the world. They've got all sorts of U.S. weapon systems. And yet they get their ass handed to them by a handful of Houthi? I don't fucking think so. I think something much more major is going on over there that we don't even know anything about. I think it's a prelude to a larger war. When I look back at Jade Helm and what the map of the Jade Helm training sort of staging area looked like, looks an awful lot like the Middle East. It looks an awful lot like a massive invasion plan, and they were running some sort of simulation, but they realized they couldn't actually simulate it over in the Middle East because half those countries would shoot us if we tried to land there. So they decided to train troops here and take down their statistics and notes and look at, oh, what would actually happen if we were involved in such a situation where we were simultaneously occupying Syria, we were occupying Iraq, we were occupying Libya, we were attacking and occupying Iran, we were involved in Yemen, probably in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, maybe a couple, certainly Afghanistan. It's an extended sort of test run as well as they can make it. I said this at the time and I maintain that this is the truth. It's a test to see if we have the capability to simultaneously occupy at least 4, maybe up to 6 nations at the same time. That's what it was. That's what Jade Helm was. And it's worrying because we see it beginning to unfold right now. Shortly thereafter, that's when things really go south in Syria. Things cook up in Yemen. We get problems in Libya. What the fuck do you think they're thinking of right now? You think they want all the world's oil supply to be throttled? You think that they want a bunch of Iranian puppets erupting in the Middle East? And they're never going to let that happen, which means that you might as well, if you're, a few years younger than me, yeah, get ready possibly to be drafted, unfortunately, unless we can reverse course. Now, we've got reason to believe maybe Trump doesn't believe that arming these rebel groups is a good idea. Hopefully he sticks to that. The situation might de-escalate. Yeah, you end up with a Russian puppet in Syria. In other words, no change. You end up with an Iranian puppet in Yemen. I would think that it would be easier to deal with that and just try to sweeten the deal by giving Iran a more normalized trade status. Show them, the West is way more wealthy than Russia. Why don't you just fucking sell us your oil? Then you'll be able to build skyscrapers like the one in Dubai or something like that. If we use our wallet, it's a hell of a lot easier than using bombs. And it means that U.S. assets don't necessarily get damaged trying to invade these places. You end up with tens of thousands of U.S. Servicemen killed for basically no reason. We go into Iraq, tens of thousands of dudes come back injured. What lasting positive impact did it have on the world? It pissed off the Iraqis against us, led to more terrorism, destabilized neighboring states, and we don't have anything to show for it. The government there is no more stable than the first day we marched in over a decade ago. Iraq is no more stable now than it was under shock and awe. Its infrastructure is half improved. Now ISIS roams freely in some of these areas. More infrastructure gets bombed out. So what improvements were made? Is it more wealthy? Are the people more given towards a positive eye to the West? No. It hasn't helped anybody. Certainly not the people there. Certainly not our population. I don't feel any more wealthy as a result of securing a few oil pipelines in Iraq. I don't think it's helped me any. I think maybe it helped Dick Cheney and some of his partners. And that's about all. That's about all. Peace out.